Hello everyone and welcome to the student debate put on by this year's McCarthy Center in honor of Gary Eichten. Gary Eichten, who is with us here tonight, is this year's McCarthy Fellow in Residence. If you haven't heard about Gary Eichten, no offense, you're living under a rock on this campus. But allow me a few seconds to give you a brief bio about Gary and what he brings to our campus. Gary is a 1969 grad of St. John's. While he was here, he was one of the forerunners in beginning KSJR Radio, which was the first Minnesota public radio station in the state of Minnesota. After an established career here at St. John's, he moved on to work for NPR. There he spent 40 years filling various roles throughout the organization. The most notable, though, was 20 years spent as the host of Midday Radio. While there, Gary accumulated dozens and dozens of awards. The most notable, however, was in 2011 he received the Craven Award, which was given by the Premark Public Affairs Journalism Awards and is considered one of the premier awards in journalism. So congratulations to Gary on that. He retired from NPR in 2012 and is now serving as this year's McCarthy Center in Resident. He was kind enough to give us his time, but also to suggest the topic of this year's debate. This year's debate, we will be focusing on why is now the time for Minnesota to legalize the use of medical marijuana. We've all heard a lot of coverage of this issue recently. We all know that Colorado passed it for the state to use for recreational usage. But that doesn't really make sense for why Minnesota has an interest in it. But over the year of 2013, this issue will come to the forefront of the state. Many believe that with the Democrats firmly in control of both the House, the Senate, and the governor, that this will be the year to pass marijuana legislation. However, Governor Dayton has made it clear that unless law enforcement officials sign on to any bill, this will not be being passed by his desk. So in the next coming months, we'll all hear a great deal of information about this, but tonight we will allow the students of St. Ben's and St. John's to give you kind of a run-through of what some of the pros and cons of this issue are. We'll also be doing a voting system so you yourselves can participate in this decision. What we're asking you to do is before this debate starts, we'd like all of you to put one penny in either the yes or the no bucket, which Drew over there will be bringing around to all of you. Vote for whichever side you personally right now believe in, either yes, we should legalize, or no, we should not. You can do that right now if you would like. You will start sending those around. Just drop your penny in and keep the other one for the rest of the debate. At the end of this evening, after hearing both sides make their arguments, we will determine a winner based on which side has had the greatest movement to their side. So it will not be determined by who has the most number of votes. So say one side has 20 to start with and the pro side has 30. If the con side has 25 at the end and the pro side has 33, the con side still wins because more of you are moved to their side of the debate. So with that, I welcome you to this evening. I hope it's educational and informative for all of you. And I will turn to Drew Breyer to introduce tonight's speakers and the orders in which they will be speaking.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight. My name is Drew Breyer. I'm a senior communications major, and I've competed in 3 of these debates previously and serve as McCarthy Center student coordinator. It is with my pleasure to introduce to you our speakers tonight. On the pro side, we have giving the introduction sophomore political science major John Schwend, sophomore political science major Aaron Kelso, sophomore political science major Ben Hutter, first-year political science major Mike Hartz, and first-year political science major Chris Lesh. On the con side, we have first-year comm and political science major Will Jude, first-year philosophy and political science major Cody Drolls, first-year biology major James Papoulas, sophomore political science major Tyler Brown, and first-year political science and philosophy major Eliora Yokaran. The structure of the debate will be modified Oxford style. So this means we have 1-minute introductions followed by 3 rounds of 4-minute speeches. After this, we have 10 minutes of questions, followed by 3-minute rebuttals from each team. So at this time, I would like to remind you to set your cell phones to stun but also to keep them close by. During our question round, we'll be taking questions from our Twitter feed, and I'll be passing out some sheets that have some information about that. But it's very simple. So what you do is you mention at McCarthy Center. So at McCarthy CTR. There's an abbreviation there. So at McCarthy Center, followed by your question. And then we'll announce those during question time. And for those still living in the dark ages, we'll have pencils and note cards floating around. With great pleasure, I introduce to you our first speaker, John Schwend. Enjoy the debate.
Hi, I would like to again thank the McCarthy Center for hosting this debate, and Minnesota Public Radio host Gary Eichten for commenting on this debate. Tonight we are debating the resolution, "Now is the time for Minnesota to legalize medical marijuana." The proposition is going to discuss three main points in this debate. First, we will emphasize Minnesota's right to regulate medical marijuana as a state. We will then evaluate the health benefits derived from medical marijuana, such as what conditions it can help, some alternatives to marijuana, and any other benefits that come from medical marijuana. Finally, we will look at the potential implications, such as Schedule I versus Schedule II drugs and gateway drugs. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to the Eugene J. McCarthy Center Student Debate. First and foremost, we would like to thank you all for being here tonight. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to Gary Eichten. It's an honor and privilege to have you here today. The students debating against the legalization of medical marijuana are going to bring up three main points. First, Cody is going to give an overview of the legal components of medical marijuana on the federal level. Second, James is going to discuss the health risks involved with marijuana use and will also recommend some more beneficial alternatives. Third, Tyler is going to debate that legalizing marijuana of any form has absolutely no social benefits whatsoever. Again, thank you for joining us here tonight, and we look forward to your feedback and questions.
What we are proposing today is the creation of a well-regulated system, one which ensures that patients who suffer from chronic, painful conditions like cancer, AIDS, and MS be allowed to receive the relief they need. Today, I will be addressing the issue through the lens of federalism by discussing why the medical marijuana industry should be governed by the states and not the federal government. So federalism is the idea of splitting government between two different tiers, national and state. The national government is like a big umbrella with these overarching laws that should govern everybody. States are made to be more local and have laws that are specific to the region. The issue of medical marijuana is one that has historically been left up to the states, simply because support for this issue varies so much between state to state. Approval ratings for medical marijuana have reached up to 85% on the east and west coasts, while remaining much lower in the south and the Midwest. The fact that so much variation exists from state to state supports the position that this issue can't adequately be addressed by the federal government's one-size-fits-all policy. In fact, under the 10th Amendment, all powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. And while the federal government does have the power to regulate commerce between the 50 states, they do not have the right to regulate commerce within a specific state. So, if Minnesota decides to grow and regulate medical marijuana within the state of Minnesota, the federal government shouldn't really have the right to interfere with this decision. One of the benefits of leaving issues like these up to the states can be best described by former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor when she said, A single courageous state may, if its citizens choose, serve as a laboratory and try novel social and economic experiments without risk to the rest of the country. In legalizing medical marijuana now, Minnesota would be able to do exactly that. We would be able to look at the policies of other states, see what works and what hasn't, and adopt the ones that we think would be best for our state. So some of the things that other states haven't exactly gotten right is the fact that legalizing medical marijuana has caused it to become very easily obtainable for recreational use by way of a doctor's note or from non-credible doctors for vague symptoms like severe pain. Minnesota would be better than that. Minnesota could control the use of medical marijuana by mandating that it be allowed only for extreme cases like cancer, AIDS, and MS. Establishing a statewide registry and issuing patient identification cards would allow for further monitoring of people who are using medical marijuana. Furthermore, Minnesota could also allow marijuana to be prescribed only where there is documentation of a legitimate patient-doctor relationship. So no prescriptions got obtained online by non-credible doctors. In any system, there will always be those who abuse it. The answer is not to eliminate this system, but to tightly control it, especially when that system is going to benefit a lot of people. And Minnesota, as a state, has a right to do that. Thank you.
We'll examine why now is not the time to legalize medical marijuana in the state of Minnesota. We will look at the Supreme Court, federal law, and the Supremacy Clause. First of all, the Supreme Court. As Ms. Kelso brought up, in the recent case Gonzalez v. Reich, the U.S. Supreme Court held that federal law enforcement authorities could criminally prosecute patients for possessing marijuana prescribed by a physician in accordance with state law. The court did not, however, overturn state medical marijuana laws, but did open the door to criminal prosecution under federal drug statutes. This means that even though state laws were not struck down, you can still be punished under federal law. Now, federal law. What does that say? As part of a larger scheme to regulate drugs and other controlled substances, federal law prohibits the cultivation, distribution, and possession of marijuana. This is important to keep in mind. No exception is made for marijuana used in the course of recommended medical treatment. Indeed, by categorizing marijuana as a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substance Act, the federal government has concluded that marijuana, quote, has no currently accepted medical use and treatment in the United States of America, end quote. Yet 18 states and the District of Columbia have decriminalized medical marijuana by enacting exceptions by their state drug laws and permit individuals to grow, possess, or use medical marijuana for those purposes. Although the U.S. Supreme Court has established as Congress's constitutional authority to enact the existing federal prohibition on marijuana, principles of federalism, as Ms. Kelso brought up, prevent the federal government from mandating that states actively support or participate in enforcing the federal law. While state resources may be helpful in combating the illegal use of marijuana, Congress's ability to compel the states to enact similar criminal prohibitions, to repeal medical marijuana exemptions, or to direct state police officers to enforce the federal law remains limited by the 10th Amendment. Now, this does remain to the states, but there is still the principle of federalism and that federal law trumps this, but we will get to that later. This doesn't mean that states should make medical marijuana legal under any circumstances. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. The relationship between the federal ban on marijuana and state medical marijuana law exemptions must be considered in the context of two distinct sovereigns, each enacting separate and independent criminal regimes with separate and independent enforcement mechanisms in which certain conduct may be prohibited under one sovereign and not the other. Those two sovereigns are the federal government and the state government. Under the federal government, you will be prosecuted for marijuana, and that's why it is now is not the time for Minnesota to legalize medical marijuana. You can still be prosecuted under that. You may not be prosecuted under the state, but it is still illegal at the end of the day. Now let's take a look at the Supremacy Clause. According to the Supremacy Clause, Article 6, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in the pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby anything in the Constitution or laws of the state not contrary notwithstanding. Furthermore, as the Supreme Court stated in Altria Group v. Good, a federal law that conflicts with the state law will trump or preempt the state law. Consistent with that command, we have long recognized that state laws that conflict with federal laws are without effect. Due to the supremacy of the Constitution, federal law, and prior Supreme Court decisions, now is certainly not the time for Minnesota to legalize medical marijuana. We will not act as a laboratory as Sandra Day O'Connor would like us to be. Thank you.
All right, thank you again for everyone being here. It's a real honor to have you here, Gary, but I'm going to get right into it. I got a lot to say. So, medical marijuana has been shown to have health benefits for certain conditions, and many organizations have backed these findings and believe it can help patients who are struggling to find assistance with pain or other symptoms. The American Medical Association was quoted saying, "Limited, controlled evidence supports the view that smoked marijuana and THC, which is a potent chemical in marijuana, can provide symptomatic relief in patients with MS, spinal cord injury, and other causes of spasticity." Now, there are certain conditions with medical marijuana can help. These conditions include cancer, AIDS, MS, multiple sclerosis, and glaucoma. So I'm going to move right into cancer. There are 25,000 new cases of cancer in Minnesota in 2010 alone, and there are 3,361 cases of AIDS in Minnesota with another 3,700 cases of HIV. Now, what medical marijuana can do is it can increase appetite for people going through chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is obviously a very hard treatment, and it can have the effect of making people lose their appetite. And this can assist with that, and it has the similar benefits to those who suffer from the wasting away effect of AIDS. Again, the American Medical Association was quoted saying, "Smoked marijuana stimulates appetite and increases caloric intake in normal subjects." Now, condition number 2, MS, multiple sclerosis. I cannot find specific data on Minnesota, but about 250,000 to 350,000 people in the United States suffer from this condition. Now, this can cause severe painful spasms from the condition. And medical marijuana can reduce the number of spasticity incidents as well as reduce the intensity of the spasticity-related pain. Studies also show that dosage does not have to increase to have the same effect. The Open Neurology Journal was quoted saying, "Participants report continued improvement at 12 months on doses conservatively limited to a maximum of 25 milligrams of THC daily. This suggests that pain relief may be sustained without dose increases." Now, third condition, glaucoma, which is a disease that can damage the eye's optic nerve. Pressure builds within the eye and creates extreme irritation for people suffering from the condition. Now, again, I could not find for Minnesota, but 2.2 million Americans suffer from this condition. Medicinal marijuana can relieve this pressure and significantly reduce the effect of the pressure building within the eye. Now, there are certain alternatives out on the market today, one being Marinol. However, the effectiveness of Marinol is not quite as effective as what medicinal marijuana has to offer. Absorption is much lower with the pill form. It can take up to 1 to 6 hours for it to fully take effect. And not only that, it only has a fraction of the effect that medicinal marijuana can offer, about 10%. Also, let's look at the cost. Marinol is much more expensive than medicinal marijuana could be. According to procon.org, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, monthly, a person could save about $164. Yearly, about $2,000. There are some drawbacks to medicinal marijuana. I'm not suggesting that it's a silver bullet solution, but opponents argue that the carcinogens in the smoke outweigh any benefits that medical marijuana can offer. But this can be minimized by vaporizing cannabis leaves to about 175 degrees to 225 degrees Fahrenheit, which prevents actual burning and therefore eliminates nearly all of the carcinogens that comes from smoking it. There are certain side effects. Side effects can include temporary lightheadedness, dry mouth, and fatigue. However, these side effects are extremely mild compared to the symptom relief it can provide, and these side effects are all present in alternatives offered today. Now, I'm going to end with a quote from the New England Journal of Medicine, which was quoted saying, "A policy that prohibits physicians from alleviating suffering by prescribing marijuana to seriously ill patients is misguided, heavy-handed, and inhumane." Thank you.
There has been a robust debate about the economic and social implications of medical marijuana. However, a more fundamental question has yet to be addressed. What is the actual medical value of marijuana, and does it offset the risks? Inhalable marijuana contains over 400 compounds, some of which possess practical pharmacological value. Marijuana contains THC, the compound chiefly responsible for its curative properties. THC is most frequently used as a secondary treatment option for patients who have experienced adverse events while on conventional medications. THC delivered both orally by capsule and in an inhalable form by smoking marijuana offers mild symptom reduction for pain, nausea, and appetite stimulation. Despite its mild curative properties, inhalable marijuana also poses significant risks. Marijuana smoke contains nearly 4 times as many tars than tobacco smoke, tars we know to be carcinogenic and tumor-promoting. Additionally, respiratory cells exposed to marijuana exhibit chemical and characteristics similar to those of precancerous lung tissue. Furthermore, preliminary studies suggest a correlation between marijuana use and earlier onset of psychosis, significantly diminished overall pulmonary function, and an increased risk for the development of testicular cancer. Fortunately, the use of inhalable marijuana is not the only method of THC delivery, as pure THC can be synthesized. THC is available under the prescription Marinol, also known as dronabinol. Marinol is a highly effective drug and has a significant advantage over inhalable marijuana. Marinol is synthesized and its concentration of THC is known, allowing practitioners to give standardized dosages based on patients' BMI, a feature not afforded to clinicians by inhalable marijuana. Levels of THC in marijuana differ from plant to plant, leaving doctors in the dark when determining dosages. This has forced healthcare professionals to allow patients to titrate their dose as they see fit, a practice seldom used in medicine and one that poses serious risks and drawbacks for patients. Marinol eliminates this issue by allowing patients to take prescribed doses based on weight and height, giving patients consistent and expected levels of THC. The facts are, marijuana is primarily used to treat 3 conditions, all of which we can currently treat with conventional drugs that are safer, more effective, and cheaper. This begs the question, then why are we having this debate about medical marijuana? The simple answer is, nobody here tonight is debating about medical marijuana. Proponents for the widespread legalization of marijuana cling to its relatively insignificant health benefits as a reason for legalization, as it has always been more socially acceptable and less daunting to voters when only people who are chronically ill would qualify for its use, when in fact the distinction between a state that has legalized only medical marijuana and a state that has legalized marijuana for recreational use, no distinction can be made. In many of the 19 states who have legalized medical marijuana, the misuse and abuse of it by said patients at doctors' frequent misprescriptions at doc shops. It has completely eroded any integrity that the medical marijuana system had to begin with, allowing for easy legal access to marijuana. Medical marijuana has been the subject of intense debate and rigorous study. It is time that the debate at the state and national levels shift to focus on the public health impacts of widespread legalization of marijuana. If Minnesota is not ready to legalize marijuana for recreational use, then Minnesota is not ready to legalize marijuana for medical use.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm coming up here to talk about what's going to happen, any possible implications that legalizing medical marijuana would have. So the first thing I want to do is try and make sure that you all understand that the legalization of medical marijuana will not lead to an increase in the recreational usage. I could start spouting philosophy, but instead I'm going to take the word of the New England Journal of Medicine, in which they say there is no evidence that use of marijuana would increase if marijuana was legalized for medicinal purposes and regulated like other medicines. They're a very highly reputed source of authority, so I took them fairly seriously, and I'd like you guys to do that as well. Now, as James pointed out, a lot of people will view this as the first step to a full legalization for recreational usage. To counter that, I'd like to point out that 18 states and the District of Columbia, that's a total of 19 in total, yeah, right? Yeah, basic math. Only 2 of them have recreationally legalized marijuana, Washington and Colorado. And now I want to talk a little bit about what happens when marijuana is used recreationally, just so we can get that on the table so you know where that stands as well. So one of the largest concerns and one of the main reasons that the federal government has deemed marijuana a Schedule I drug is that it will be used as a gateway drug. In other words, use of marijuana will lead to use of harder drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, or heroin. And this is simply not true, and I'd like to use the Dutch as an example. The Dutch, Amsterdam, they've completely legalized recreational usage of marijuana. And there have been a lot of studies done comparing them to the European Union. And the only hard drug in which they are higher than the European average is ecstasy. To take a comparison here, Dutch adult population usage of cocaine is around 0.6%. The European average is more than double that at 1.3%. Compare it back to the United States. Heroin usage in the United States is around 1.4% in the adult population, and the Dutch only have 0.4%. So the entire argument that it can be used as a gateway it's negligible. And the Institute of Medicine came out and said that they had found there's insufficient evidence to support the proposition that marijuana use necessarily led the progression to experimentation with harder drugs. Furthering on into this argument or debate, undoubtedly people are going to claim that marijuana is highly addictive. And this is simply not the case. I'd like to ask, how many people here drink coffee or some type of caffeinated beverage once a day? I most certainly do, trust me. So the majority of us. According to Congressional Quarterly, marijuana is less addictive than caffeine. So we all partake in something which is more addictive than marijuana every day. To give you another measure as compared to other drugs or other substances, marijuana usage, about 10% of regular marijuana users become addicted, whereas addiction arises in 15% of alcohol users, 32% for nicotine users, and 23% for opiate users. So marijuana is 3 times less addictive than cigarettes, less than half as addictive as opiates, an example of which would be morphine. So what's really interesting to note in this debate is morphine in particular and cocaine are both labeled as Schedule II drugs. So you can use those under the prescription of a doctor. But marijuana is unfairly labeled as a Schedule I drug. In order to fulfill the requirements of that, it must have a high potential for abuse, which just doesn't exist because it's not addictive. And I'd like you to keep that in mind when we're having this debate. So thank you for your time.
Drugs are bad, okay? The South Park guidance counselor, Mr. Mackey's often quoted line is what this debate ultimately comes down to tonight. Tonight I'm going to argue that because legalizing medical marijuana is inevitably going to lead to more recreational use, we're in effect debating the legalization of marijuana in its entirety. Legalization of medical marijuana will lead to more recreational use through 2 means. First and foremost, because prescribing medical marijuana ultimately comes down to a doctor's note, many, if not the majority, of supposed patients are actually going to be using this drug for recreational purposes. Consider this. 94% of cardholders in Oregon and Colorado receive medicinal cannabis for pain. In Arizona, the state which, with regulations very comparable to that which our opponents are wishing to mimic, this number is 90%. Meanwhile, those suffering from cancer and AIDS combine for just 3% of cardholders in Colorado, while Oregon reports that less than 10% suffer from these, in addition to other ailments specified by our opponents and in the legislation, such as glaucoma and MS. In Venice Beach, people dress up as marijuana leaves and advertise $35 10-minute evaluations that no matter what your ailment, you ultimately receiving medicinal marijuana. They end in a doctor's recommendation for medical marijuana. And all it takes is headache or anxiety, and before you know it, you're flying high with bestsellers like Mango, Hash, and Fuzzleberry. Because of high demand and the absence of consequences, many doctors in these states have made fortunes as nothing more than glorified pot dealers in white coats. Doctors are people. People usually enjoy making money, and other people like to smoke marijuana and are willing to pay for it. This simple fact proves that any regulation that keeps the benefit of the doubt in the hands of a doctor or doctors will inevitably fail to prevent such a law as exploitation. The second way this will lead to increased recreational use is a normalization of the drug, which has drastic health and cultural implications. If a drug is handed out like candy, as it is in states in which medical marijuana is legal, it is obviously going to shift the socially constructed perception of the drug. First, we can see this effect in the simple fact that it has acted as a stepping stone to complete legalization in Colorado and Washington. Secondly, we can see this in illegal recreational use being considerably higher in states where medical marijuana is already legal, particularly amongst the youth. Teenage use across the country has already increased 40% as a whole, and the number of kids consuming the drug 20 times a month is up 80% since the recent spike in medical marijuana legalizations. Moreover, the number of kids under 17 that perceive medical marijuana, or marijuana in general, as dangerous is rapidly decreasing, particularly in these states where it's legalized, where kids are 10% less likely to view it as dangerous. These states also had the highest percentage of youth marijuana usage in the country, with an average of approximately 8% between the ages of 12 to 17 using the drug at least once a month. So why marijuana in and of itself is bad has already been elaborated upon by James and Cody. But in light of my argument, and for the sake of concluding cost-benefit analysis, I would just like to summarize and add to this case just a little bit. As James made very clear, it is not a unique treatment, and it is linked to numerous health issues which are very severe: cardiovascular, mental, respiratory, and cancerous diseases. Not to mention that it has massive harms to adolescents, who are very susceptible to severe cognitive impairment as a result of marijuana use. Teens that use the drug have permanently lower IQs and are twice as likely to drop out of school. Contrary to what our opponents have said, marijuana is extremely addictive. 10% of users become addicted after one use, but this jumps to well over 30% after 5 uses. Many more people will become addicted to this drug as it continues to be normalized, and that number increases. Marijuana severely impairs driving, and it's very difficult to test. And as Cody mentioned, it violates federal law, quite frankly. So yes, drugs are bad. Marijuana is not an exception to that, and medical marijuana should not be legalized in the great state of Minnesota.
With that, we conclude the structured speeches of our debate. Now we want to open it up to you. We want to hear kind of what your thoughts are on this debate so far. So please send us your questions via Twitter, and Abe will answer them. Otherwise, if you want to write them down, or if that's easier for you, Anna, who's sitting by the microphone over there, would love to get your question. Just raise your hand, she'll come over to you and write it down. So we open it up to you.
Okay, so the first question posed is, will proposed law be preceded by comparative test with other pain meds said to improve quality of lives for chronic illness?
Well, we already have a lot of studies showing what medicinal marijuana can do, and these are these symptoms are not just traditional pain. They're not like a headache. They're not like a stomach ache. It's these spasticities that you see in MS. It's this wasting away effect of AIDS. It's the loss of appetite from chemotherapy. These are not normal types of pain, and so therefore using ibuprofen isn't going to be very effective. Or medicinal marijuana will be extremely effective, especially in increasing appetite, like I stated before, or with the reducing the spasticity and then the pain resulting from the spasticity. This is not a normal type of pain.
Yeah, I just want a quick touch on that. So what they're kind of arguing is that medical marijuana, it's the magic bullet, and it's curing all these diseases. Well, what's the magic bullet is THC, and it's not the marijuana itself; it's the THC in the marijuana. Well, we have developed a way to synthesize that THC, and we know it as Marinol, and it's there's already a system for it. It's a Schedule III drug. We wouldn't even need to develop a whole new system of distribution or laws, and so there is no point to inhaling THC. There's 2 methods of delivery. You can inhale it or you can take a pill. Right now, you can take a pill, and there's really, the regulation system's already set up. So I think it'd be an incredible waste of time to set up a whole other system for another method of delivery.
Okay, we'll take another question from Abe.
All right, so another one that's a good follow-up from Twitter is, how can Colin argue against weed and praise Marinol at the same time? Why should all Minnesotans be slave to Big Pharma for their health?
Well, that's a good question. Here's the difference between Marinol. Again, this is the difference between Marinol and marijuana. Marinol contains THC. That's all it has. That's the active ingredient. Medical marijuana, the smoke from medical marijuana contains 400 compounds in mainstream smoke, and some of which we know to be tumor-promoting and carcinogenic. So you have two options. One causes cancer. One, you can take a pill, and the side effects are, like what you said, dry mouth. So I'll let that speak for itself.
And I'd like to touch on that too. Like I said before, if you vaporize the marijuana, that eliminates nearly all of the carcinogens. Like it's almost all of them are eliminated completely if you just use vaporization rather than smoking. So that's a very safe method. And like I said before, it takes an extremely long time for the absorption of the marinol to take effect, 1 to 6 hours, whereas smoking or vaporizing takes 10 to 15 minutes. And so I frankly think that we need to look at this alternative, and it's extremely beneficial for people suffering from this pain.
Okay. And we'll.
Can I get on that really quick before the next question? Just really quickly. Also, I think we need to factor in that there's not the same cultural ramifications by having marinol legalized. I mean, college students, you don't say that you don't have Friday nights. You're not going to go around and sit in a circle and do marinol. I mean, let's get real. So I mean, we have to factor that in.
Anna.
Who's going to pay for the programs that will keep marijuana regulated? Will the state of Minnesota ask federal government or tax its citizens?
Okay, I'll take that one too then. I think it will be imposed by the state, obviously, because like we talked about before, the federal system, this is going to be in the state. But at the same time, it honestly will not be very expensive. It's just going to be regulating within the doctors. It's not going to be a huge, crazy cost. We're just going to be looking at the drug, and then we're going to have certain designated people who grow either marijuana or obviously in a very controlled way, and therefore the cost, it really won't be much of an issue. And it's just, like I said, it's another alternative for patients. And from all the research I've seen, it's actually quite a bit cheaper than using marinol.
I just want to quick touch on that. And I have your study that you're looking at right here from ProCon, yeah. And so you're right. I see it here. So marinol, one tablet of marinol without insurance is more expensive than, and I don't know how I have no idea how they calculate this, the equivalent amount, which I don't know how they calculate that either.
It's on the bottom. The same study.
One second. Of marijuana. And so, but the thing is, if you have insurance, it says, if you have insurance with copay, it costs $0 to patients. And so, unless you're somebody who has AIDS and you don't have insurance, which would be very difficult. Imagine the medical expense. You're probably going to have insurance, and it's going to be covered. And the thing is, marijuana is not covered by Medicare, Medicaid. Those are federal programs, and the federal government doesn't view marijuana as a drug. So then you are paying out of pocket for that. So I mean, in the end, marijuana costs more.
Okay. Anna, do you have another question for us?
Yeah. This one goes to the pro-marijuana side. You mentioned Minnesota being able to control medical use better than other states that have legalized it. How could the state guarantee these safeguards? How is Minnesota different?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, it's all about looking at what other states have done and learning from those policies. So when we're making this system for the state of Minnesota, you can kind of pick and choose what kind of regulations you want to have. And so if we want this to be really, really strict, have it just for people with cancer, just for people with terminal illness who are suffering really severe pain, then you implement that system.
Okay. I'd like to follow up on that and say that we can't guarantee that it's going to be safely regulated. Drugs are corruptible. Drugs are corrupt in themselves, and that's exactly what we need to look at, is that because we are dealing with a corrupt substance, we are going to be dealing with a corrupt system.
Well, I'm just going to say to that he says that you can't ever regulate drugs, but we prescribe morphine, we prescribe Vicodin, all kinds of painkillers that could potentially be dangerous, but we keep that under control.
I'd also like to jump in on this. I think one great example would be a well-known drug, Adderall, and if you go around college campuses, you'd probably be surprised at the high percentage of kids that develop ADD around finals week and then need some Adderall to fix that. So I think if you're going to say that no drug can be controlled, then you have to understand that all drugs are going to be abused at some level, and that the only thing you can do is set up as much regulation, as Aaron said, as possible. And that's the plan that we're providing and laying out.
I promise this will be really quick. All right, so ultimately the problem here comes down to the fact that the doctors, in all the regulations that are proposed here, the doctors have the final say. Doctors are people, they're corruptible, and the term pain is so vague that they found tons of loopholes regarding that. The state that has a lot of the regulations that they're proposing, the state of Arizona, has the same problems that I highlighted in my speech. And I won't get into those, but...
I'm just going to say to that, I mean, the term pain is very vague, but the term cancer is not vague. So if we want this to be restricted, you put restrictions on it.
All right, for the sake of time, guys, we're going to move on. We have time for about one final question. So Anna or Abe, do you guys want to decide?
This one goes to the con side. Can you discuss vaporization and state your opinion on such treatment?
Right. Well, I can talk about that a little bit, and I know Ben talked about this a little bit. So this is interesting. So basically, it's kind of like smoking marijuana, except for the fact that it burns the marijuana at a different temperature, which supposedly eliminates certain compounds from leaving the plant. And again, this is actually relatively new, and even as Ben mentioned, it does eliminate some of the carcinogenic components, but not all of them. So at the end of the day, again, at the end of the day, you have two options of delivering this THC. You can even vaporize it. There may be some cancer-causing components, or you can take a pill with zero cancer-causing components.
And I feel like I keep adding on, but additionally, there is other effects that we talked about, the other health concerns regarding cardiovascular issues. There's a lot of stuff that's just coming out now about mental health down the road, trouble with adolescents. I mean, it's not limited to respiratory diseases. So.
And talking about cost, the system for vaporization is incredibly expensive, and whereas Marinol is just, you need a glass of water. That's the tool for it. So.
You guys have about 30 seconds. Do you want to make a response?
Yeah, I'll just make a quick response. I'm not sure how expensive a vaporizer costs. I really don't think it's going to be all that much more expensive. I think that's been exaggerated there, but more expensive than a glass of water.
No side comments.
But again, it removes nearly all of the carcinogen except for a very, very small amount of carbon monoxide. But that's honestly, it's almost negligible. And so vaporization, it seems to me from all the research I've done that it's an extremely safe method of taking in the marijuana.
And with that, we are going to conclude question time. However, Drew has a quick announcement for us.
So we're going to do the vote again right now and to see if anybody's opinion changed. And then I believe Mr. Eichten will speak a little bit as we tally.
We are going to actually have one more speech by each team, which is a rebuttal that will sum up both sides' arguments and make any final remarks. So after that, we will do one more tally of your guys' votes. So with that, I open it up to the rebuttal.
I'd like to once again thank everyone for being here, especially Gary Eichten. It's an honor to have him. So far, the debate has been excellent, and hopefully the rebuttals can give everyone a clear idea of what's been argued here today. The first main issue that's been argued here today is the legality of medical marijuana. And our opponents stated that, first off, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government has the ability to prosecute people for the use of medical marijuana. The problem with this statement is that the Obama administration has clearly stated and made it official that they will not prosecute, and the federal government will not prosecute medical marijuana users. So you will not have to worry about the federal government, and at the state level, the state law enforcement is obligated to follow state laws. So you have protection from both the state and federal government with medical marijuana use. I'd also like to add on to that the fact that Erin brought up in her speech that the 10th Amendment gives powers to the states to implement laws like these that are not mentioned to powers in the federal government. Moving on to the medical issue, James' main piece that he brought up was the idea that the alternatives like Marinol are better than medical marijuana. While they do work for some patients, the point is that these alternatives do not work for all patients, and this is where medical marijuana comes in. Medical marijuana is not a substitute, it's a backup. It's not for everyone with pain or everyone with cancer. It's for the small select group of people who the alternative medicines that are typically used do not work. We're not trying to throw medical marijuana in everybody's hands. We're just trying to put it in the select group of people that truly do need it, where the alternative medicines do not work. And as Ben brought up in his speech, it has been known to bring relief to people with cancer, AIDS, MS, glaucoma, along with being cheaper and effective in its own sense. Moving on to the social implications of medical marijuana, our opponents brought up that it would be an increased recreational usage and that there would be high misuse and abuse, that doctors would become dealers. The fact is that Mike brought up in his speech that they showed in the Dutch that increased usage is not true, and that also the addictiveness of marijuana is far less than cigarettes, alcohol, and other illegal drugs, showing that there would be a highly unlikely amount of increased users just because this is used. I'd also like to bring up that Aaron brought up, and our team has brought up multiple times, the fact that our regulations would be much stricter than other states because Minnesota would be learning from these other states. Regulations like screening patients to make sure they actually need medical marijuana, the use of registry and ID cards, and second opinions from other doctors, so we don't just have one doctor who's looking to make a quick buck. I'd like to finish by stating that the fact is that medical marijuana can help some people, and Minnesota has the right to implement this, and that this truly is the time for Minnesota to implement medical marijuana laws. Thank you.
All right, guys, now is not the time for Minnesota to legalize medical marijuana. They said earlier that they're going to promise to have well-regulated system. They're going to have a doctor, a second doctor, and a third doctor maybe to prescribe this, and they have to define pain and some other issues as well-regulated stuff. But really, prosecution is possible under the federal level, and the 18 states right now that are legalizing them, they can it's still illegal to cultivate, possess, and use marijuana. It can lead to prosecution. Like Cody said earlier, the corrupt substances will lead to corrupt system. Going to the medical side, they're saying about how Marinol is costing more, but you know, Marinol has limited controlled dosage that was proven to be successful. I mean, think about it. If medical marijuana is really that useful, why hasn't this been legalized before, really? And the THC, like James has said, that is the magic substance that we really, really need. I mean, if you really want to get high, that is the recreational use of it, and it will become addictive because, getting high is good, supposedly, and if it feels good, then you would want to be addicted to it, and you would want to be using it regularly, which just comes to the Tyler's point about the normalization of the culture of using marijuana. I mean, doctors are going to want to make more money, even though they're already rich, but I mean, if you can make more money, why not? That is the system of the capitalization in the United States. So doctors are going to make money. There's going to be normal. We can use it as alcohol. I mean, people are going to start to drink from the afternoon. They're going to be drunk at midnight. They're going to be stuff like this. And, I mean, yeah, you can prohibit it to cancer and just limit it to cancer people, but, I mean, there's going to always be leeways. And that's why the alternative already exists, which is Marinol. That's the one thing we already have and we should keep using.
With that, can we give all of our debaters a big round of applause for all the work they put in? Drew and Jake are now going to send around the buckets that you put your pennies in to begin with, so we can get your tally at the end of this vote. I want to thank you all very much for coming. We're going to ask you to stick around for a little bit to hear Mr. Eichten's remarks on this topic. Hopefully you learned something, and moving forward, if this does become a bigger issue in Minnesota, you will be able to understand some of the arguments surrounding the issue. So thank you for coming. We hope you will stick around for just a little bit longer with us.
So how in the world do I follow that, you know? First of all, congratulations to both sides. Great presentations of an interesting subject, and you've done very, very well. You know, I had a chance to do some debating in high school, nothing like this, and you know, I guess it took me a while after I got out of high school to realize how valuable this kind of experience is. First of all, of course, the mere fact these folks are willing to get up in front of you and talk, make their arguments, and so on is pretty impressive. A lot of people do not like speaking in public. Fortunately, they do. The advantage of debate seems to me, you get a chance to see both sides of the arguments, whatever arguments there are. Sometimes there are a lot more than two sides. But we get into a situation so often in our lives, in our public life, certainly in this country, where you just fixate on one side and by golly, this is the truth. I've got the truth and these other people don't know anything. Well, you find out in debate that that's not the case. The other side has a lot of good things to say too, and maybe you should listen to the other side. Hopefully they're going to listen to you, and hopefully you can come to some general agreement. The other thing I think that's really interesting about a debate like this, it underscores the fact that people can disagree on even controversial subjects without being disagreeable, without calling names, without impugning the other person's integrity. There was some of that, of course, you know, there were suggestions, you know. Now, all kidding aside, it's a great demonstration of how we, I think, should hope public debate is conducted in this country, you know. You can disagree, but you don't really have to demonize the other side just because somebody doesn't agree with you. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure to sit through this. Be interested to see who swayed the most people in this room, which is how we're going to score the debate. It's not, you know, the final tally, but how much did the tally change? So, thank you for inviting me to participate in this. It was a great honor, and you did well.
All right, so before the debate, there were 47 that voted yes in favor of the legalization of medical marijuana, and 30 that voted no. After, there were 38 that voted yes, and 38 that voted no. And that means that we actually had a one total vote difference from after rather than before, because I believe Mr. Eichten didn't submit his second coin. But regardless, the noes swayed the most people, and therefore they were able to convince people of their argument more. So, yeah, thanks.
We can race.
Double team it.
We just want to make a quick plug for tomorrow night. We encourage all of you at 7 o'clock to come hear Gary Eichten's interview with Governor Dayton. It will take place in Upper Gretzky. You all should come. It will be a great event, and it's also a great way to get more knowledge about what's going on and what Governor Dayton sees in this road ahead. So we encourage you all to come. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and just as another quick plug, because why not? I have the microphone. This weekend, the College of St. Benedict St. John's University are the proud hosts of the 2013 Minnesota College Forensics Association State Tournament. So if this seemed like fun to you, then come check out around this weekend, and maybe you could be up here next year. So thank you all for coming.